The Way of Kings. This beautiful, thick book accomplishes something that many books can only dream of. And I think in 50 years, this whopping 400,000 word tome will be a genre-defining classic. Before we begin, I'm just going to mention I'm not going to get into significant spoilers in this video, but only surface level stuff that you get introduced to early on in the story, so there's really no need to worry. With world building so far eclipsed only by series like The Lord of the Rings and The Wheel of Time, the Stormlight Archive is truly epic in scale. And with Brandon Sanderson himself stating that he spent years working on the world before he began writing, this recognition is certainly deserved. The world of Roshar is a large and diverse place, with all sorts of different peoples and cultures that are all introduced in a fairly organic way, all things considered. The world of Roshar is a land governed by high storms, traveling from east to west, slowly losing power during its trip. And where the world building really manifests itself is through the vegetation's reaction to these high storms. Further to the east, the land is more barren. It's a wasteland. The vegetation is more durable. We see blades of grass and leaves retreat upon approach from humans. This is a defense mechanism designed to survive high storms and the insane environment that these storms provide. This fact is often described each time a character approaches wildlife. And this is just one of the many examples of the thought that has gone into this world. There's more examples further to the west, with trees lying down upon approach of the high storms and more diverse plant life growing behind cliffs. This also makes it so that cultivating trees and plant life that don't retreat from the high storms is seen as a status symbol. Another large part of the world is the different peoples. Brandon Sanderson doesn't include some of the more Tolkien-influenced races in his stories. In other words, there are no elves, orcs, or dwarves to be found in this world. Instead, he opts for a more original demographic, comprised mostly by humans. But with these humans, there's great variety. There are the Alethi, the Vedans, the Emuli, the Horn-Eaters, the Iriali, the Hardashian, the Reshi, the Talon, the Shin, and so on. The Talon, for example, have very long eyebrows, and as such, this plays a huge part in their fashion. Some style their eyebrows in different ways, as many move them behind their ears, and others just let them droop down. The Vedan is more pale-skinned, whereas the Alethi is more tan, and the Makabaki are even darker. The Iriali have golden hair and eyes, and the Horn-Eaters are larger with more red hair, and they live in the Horn-Eater Peaks. And these people all speak different languages and have varying accents within the story. But what's more, these are all peoples and cultures we're introduced to organically throughout the story, unlike some other stories where we just have to read up on it on a Wikipedia page. The world is actually represented within the story in a very clear-cut way. And the lands that are more distant to where the main story takes place, we're introduced to through the interlude chapters. These are chapters in between the main parts of the story, which serve as both foreshadowing for future stories and characters, but also as a great world-building tool, where we experience these cultures firsthand. The Way of Kings does have one different race though, and that is the Parshendi. You see, 5 years ago, the Alethi king was murdered during a peace celebration between the Alethi and the Parshendi. This started a long war in which the Alethi chased the Parshendi to the Shattered Plains, a mysterious, barren place with plateaus of rock between the split chasms. These Parshendi are also original creatures that sing strange rhythms to communicate and have carapace growing from their marbled skin. But these are not just surface level races, but a people that's given great nuance and depth throughout the story. Brandon Sanderson tends to prefer less with more depth than more that is shallow. And of course, we have the last but biggest, the staple of Brandon Sanderson, the magic system, the Stormlight. Throughout the Way of Kings though, this magic is still mostly a mystery, with hints dating back to the ancient era of the Knights Radiant, the original wielders of this magic, fighting against the ancient Voidbringers. But at some point, something went wrong, and the Knights Radiant betrayed humanity. These are but a few of the many mysteries that Brandon Sanderson teases us with throughout this book, and these are also one of his greatest strengths. One of the things I've always found that makes Sanderson's stories so interesting, despite their insane length, is the mysteries and twists and turns introduced throughout the story. His stories are rarely predictable. The Stormlight Archive isn't the only of his stories where this is the case. For those that have read Mistborn, they will know that small hints and mysteries given in just one book are paid off in a hugely satisfying way, all the way into the last book, strengthening the series as a whole and bathing it in a new light. And trust me, this is also the case with the Stormlight Archive. The more you get into the series, the more you realize that every small little detail was planned out from the very beginning. That every small secret hinted at something greater. That every small detail that Sanderson put in there was put there for a reason. Like a delicate craftsman, where divided, all the pieces look like nothing but just that, pieces. But when put together, they forge into an even greater whole. But before we continue, I invite you to gently touch the like button. Lightly caress it. Make it feel your love. But enough of that. Every great story needs to have great characters and challenging themes. It isn't enough for a setting to be interesting or a plot to be well crafted. If the characters and themes are nothing special, this story won't be either. At best, it would just be entertaining pulp fiction. But fortunately, Sanderson has got this too. In fact, he's got it in spades. Not a single one of his characters is neglected the love and care that they deserve. Shallan, Kaladin, and Dalinar are all hugely interesting already in The Way of Kings, the first of what's planned to be a 10-book series, by the way. Kaladin struggles with morality and coming to terms with what his decisions have cost him, and deciding if he wants to stick to his ideals or let hate overtake him. Shallan was raised in a sheltered household by a cruel father who dealt with shady people. But now that he's dead, she needs to take drastic actions in direct contrast to her upbringing to save her family. Dalinar is haunted by mysterious visions that speak of an approaching threat, but his past looms, and doubts as to whether he can trust his own mind start to linger. These three storylines all play out separately at first, but eventually turns into one large overarching story. But what's most interesting about all of these characters is how well written they all truly are, and all the interesting character arcs each of them go through. Dalinar in particular is one of my favorite characters in fiction, period. Sanderson knows the importance of great characters, and if you don't trust me, trust the word of the great Brandon Sanderson himself. A book with an interesting setting but bad characters is generally a bad book. But a book with a boring, unoriginal setting but great characters is still a great book. The Stormlight Archive is truly an epic fantasy, with almost every book surpassing the 400,000 word mark. Oh. Here's each of them. These are all the same length. This is just a little bit thicker pages, but they're all approximately the same length. Pretty thick, pretty thick. Its story is more in line with things like The Wheel of Time, a long saga of 4.4 million words, and when Sanderson has finished this series, the total word count of the Stormlight Archive will probably be similar. And with its part in the cosmere and the ever-increasing importance of this interconnected universe, by the end of all this, Brandon Sanderson might very well have created the biggest world to ever hit fantasy, possibly even surpassing The Lord of the Rings. And unlike The Wheel of Time, I would say that the characters have been given more depth, and the story as a whole has been crafted with more grace and originality than The Wheel of Time had at the same word count. And considering the sheer length of The Way of Kings, its pacing is masterful. I don't know a lot of authors who wouldn't struggle with such a tome. So to finish this off, should you read The Way of Kings? I think the answer should be obvious. You're missing out on reading possibly one of the greatest fantasy stories ever put to paper while it's unfolding. You're missing out on one of the most sophisticated, nuanced worlds ever imagined. You're missing out on some of the greatest character building in fiction. You're missing out on The Way of Kings, the next king of fantasy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please go watch 2 of my other videos and leave a like, subscribe, whatever you want if you enjoyed. So have fun, guys.